What's going on, guys? Mitch here, and today we're taking a look at the 2024 Cervelo S5. And if you guys have been following me for a while, you will have seen this bike in a lot of my vlogs, and I figured it would be kind of time to do a long-term review after, I don't even know, a couple thousand miles of ride time so far this year on it, and wanted to give you my thoughts. As you can kind of tell as well, I did try to keep this as dirty as possible, obviously, for this review. Fun fact, right now in Calgary, at the time of filming this, we do have an outdoor water ban due to a water main break, so there is some sweat and whatnot on it, but typically my long-term reviews is I do want to show the bike in kind of all its glory and kind of how I've ridden it, and you know, it's not this polished gem all the time. It certainly can be, but this does have a couple rides on it since its last wash, so please bear with me as I kind of showcase some of the grime and dirt that the bike has earned throughout the year, and knowing that yes, it does in fact all come off if it wanted to. So I'm not exactly sure where to start this review, but I guess what I'll do is I'll kind of talk from the front to the back, and we'll kind of go from there, and I'm sure there's going to be some overlap and some overall discussion, but let's start, I guess, at the front of the bike and work our way back. So to start things off, let's just take a look at that wicked thin aero head tube that is on the Cervelo. You know, one of the cool draws to this bike that I really dug in 2024 anyway was that it had their, I think they call it Cervelo Black or All Black, I can't recall what they call it, but basically it's kind of like their, you know, ready to paint if it was a specialized frame, which is just beautiful. Just a super subtle matte black. And for the guys out there or females out there where maybe you're upgrading a black bike to a different black bike, it's not as loud as going from black to green or blue or whatever. So I really dig the black, and I also on the head tube here and the front fork, it's kind of a gloss black, which is just a really nice overall look from my perspective. Now, if we're comparing the two colors here, we can kind of see on the left is that nice flat matte black, and on the right is kind of that, you know, darker gloss color. So looks really good. I guess the next point to get into here would be kind of, well, let's talk about the fork. So the fork's got a really nice aero profile to it, as you can kind of see. Really nice, super thin, and you know, I think we're going to use a lot of the words throughout this this long-term review that's, you know, slicing the wind, cutting through things fast, you know, it aero, like that's what this bike truly is in a nutshell. And the fork, you know, it's very deep, as you can kind of tell, and that's to maximize its aero ability, which is really good. Now it is a through axle fork as well, which is awesome. So as you can kind of see here, the axle on the bottom, just a nice touch. You know, it adds stability to an overall design, and you know, quite frankly, really usable in the real world. Taking the axle in and out has not been a problem, and you know, any of the multi-tools that you may need, you know, typically have, I think it's a 6 mil, it might even be a 5 mil up front to get that off, but pretty much easy all the way around. Something else to note of the fork is that it does have all internal cable routing right down from the handlebar on the left, you know, basically through the inside of the bar, down into the head tube, down through the steer tube, into the fork, and out the bottom of the fork. And you know, it's details like this that is obviously very appreciated, which has kind of become the norm over the last few years on a lot of the aero bikes. It's all about reducing a drag and, you know, cleaning things up to be as simple and as attractive as possible, and the front brake is no exception on the fork. Tire clearance, as expected, not an issue. Lots of room. I'm running right now GP 5000, 28 mil on the reserve wheels, and there's a ton of room to fit that in there. As you can kind of see, there's no real issues. I would have probably no issues running up to a 32, possibly a 34 on this bike, depending, but you know, something of note obviously is that the wheel is in fact centered, unlike the SL8, just saying. On to the bar and stem. You know, as we can kind of see here, I've kind of settled in at 2.5 spacers. I believe it comes with 6, maybe 7 spacers of room. and they're all kind of a couple different widths, as you can see here. Bottom one's a half and then 2. Pretty simple overall concept. I guess the one thing here to think about the bar stem interface with the steer tube as well. There's a certain level of stiffness in the front end of the bike, and that's one of the key words as well in this long-term review. We're going to talk about is stiffness. Stiffness can be a good thing, it can also be a bad thing. And I would say it's kind of both on this bike, in certain circumstances obviously. But on the front end of this bike, the fork comes up to the top here and has another anchor point on the steer tube. So the front end stiffness is not just found in the head tube itself, it's actually on how the fork attaches to the frame. It's a lot like a dual crown fork on a mountain bike, where you're kind of anchoring 2 different spots to act as a lever on the bike. So really cool. I found the adjustments on the stem very easy to utilize, and I would not have a problem doing that out in the field, out on the road, adjusting it. It's very simple to take a couple bolts on top, pop the cover off, and I've done a video on this already if you want to look at it in detail, and subtract those thermoplastic spacers. I believe what they are made of. Very simple, easy to do, and not an issue. The aero stem itself, you know what? It's great because you've got a couple different positions on the bar that you can utilize, kind of a forward and a negative, which works great. And it's not a one-piece design, so you're not married to that stem length or that bar width. You can independently adjust both. Obviously the bar's super aero and cuts through the wind really easily, and that's where this bike really shines, is when you're actually cutting through the wind versus kind of getting it up to speed. The other problem that I would kind of say that this bike has is this out front Garmin mount. It's held in place I think by a 2 or 2.5 mil bolt. Tighten it down, etc., to the recommended specs, but it does have a tendency to kind of bounce around. When you are hitting things hard, it tends to move around. And given that this is an 830 and it's a touch screen, I wasn't really too happy having to adjust that on the go because, as you know, it's a touch screen. So you touch it and all of a sudden it's freezing and pausing and stuff. So that was kind of annoying, but as long as you're kind of keeping the knuckle bolt on the Garmin mount itself in good shape, then it's not going to go anywhere. But otherwise, handlebar, really comfortable, good ergonomics, and cuts the wind like no other. And then that in conjunction with the 2 points that you can adjust underneath the bar to kind of change the leveling on it, 2 positions. It's a nice feature to have. The only other thing that I would comment on the bar is the entire overall package of stem and bar, not the front end, just the stem and bar, tended to be a little flexible from my perspective. And because there's so much stiffness in that head tube, I found that a lot of the road vibrations and just subtleties of the road were kind of smoothed out a little bit in the stem and bar. I can't say it's either the stem or the bar. It was both working together, but that's kind of what I noticed. And then the only other thing to really mention here is obviously on the handlebars, it doesn't have a whole lot of flair to it. So my personal favorite so far that I've ridden is the NV Aero bar, and that one was kind of like a 37 in the hoods, 42 in the drops, so fairly big flare. Whereas here, I think you're within like ½ an inch top to bottom. So pretty simple, but overall, also very comfortable and also very aero. So nothing to really complain too much about the bar and stem. It's kind of just a win-win overall. Let's kind of wrap up the front of the bike there. So we talked about the bar, talked about the stem, talked about the adjustability, and kind of the overall aero feel of the front end. Super aero, super stiff, but a lot of the subtlenesses of the road are taken out with the bar and stem, I'd say. The rest of the bike, let's look at kind of this main section of the bike. So what first drew me into this bike was actually the entire area on the bike kind of in here, where we have, super tight tolerances around the tire. That curved seat stay just looks terrific. The nice tight aero tubing that actually flares down from the top of the head tube and kind of, nice and wide out towards the bottom bracket, kind of giving you that transfer of power. It's just an overall really good looking bike, and definitely something that has that high level of shaping and technology factor to it, which is always what I really dig. Now take that aero shaping and bring it down to the bottom bracket, and unfortunately I've got this gorgeous set of SRAM force cranks and unused power meter in the way. because I'm obviously running ASSI on my pedals. But a little joke. You know what? Great power transfer in the frame, and I'll do a separate video on the S5 versus the Tarmac SL8 after spending a ton of time on both. Two different ride styles, so I'll kind of try to separate that here. But the power transfer on this bike is imminent and stiff. It's, you know, never reluctant to want to move forward, and that's because of this massive bottom bracket area that has a lot going on. So it's a blessing and a curse, because on one hand you've got a lot of power transfer and that stiffness that goes along with it, and on the other hand you have some inherent ride factor that's not necessarily, or road factor, sorry, that's not necessarily soaked up through the frame. So I'm going to try to kind of compare this with, funny enough, the settings on a downhill bike suspension. So as some of you know, I used to race downhill mountain bikes, and there'd be a certain time where, you know, a buddy of mine or someone would try to ride my bike. And to give you an idea, I raced professional level, so it was fairly high intensity and speed as a result. So what I'm trying to get at here is this. When an average person got on my mountain bike, the suspension would feel too stiff. It would feel almost too fast, the suspension-wise. It just didn't quite make sense until you got that bike up to speed. And a lot of that is kind of what I'm feeling with that big, thick bottom bracket and that heavy power transfer. The bike doesn't ride particularly smooth until you get it up to speed. And, you know, when you are at that, you know, 35, 40, 45, 50 kilometer an hour mark, and you are hitting road vibrations and bumps, all of a sudden the bike kind of comes to life. It doesn't feel as scary and as uncomfortable as what it does when you're going under 20 kilometers an hour, where you're hitting bumps and you're getting immediate road vibration up through the frame into this massive seat post, or up through this massive head tube. So that's kind of what I was trying to get at here, is that when the bike is going fast, it feels fantastic. It feels comfortable. It feels like it belongs at speed. But the difference is, because it's an aero bike, it takes a little longer to get up to speed. But once it's there, boy, does it ever hold that speed. Much easier than, say, a Tarmac SL8. It just wants to be at 40 kilometers an hour, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to stay there. So that's kind of what I was trying to get at with the suspension comparison. I didn't have any issues on the axle side of things here, and as you can kind of see as we go down through the chain stays and seat stays of the bike, overall, it's just a really comfortable bike on the back end. It's quick, snappy, it handles like it's on rails, and when you lean this bike over, because that, the wheel's tucked right into this thing, it certainly feels like it's almost a cheat code, and when you're turning, you're almost waiting for it to lose traction, but it doesn't. It's very unique that way, and unlike any other bike that I've ever ridden on the road side of things, it just turns like it's absolutely on rails. We do have a lot of tire clearance as well in the back end of this bike, as you can see, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned already, I am running Continental 28C GP5000s here. So lots of room. I probably wouldn't go much more than 32 in this frame. I don't know if it's rated for 32s or 34s. I can't remember. But to give you an idea, you know, I can get like half a finger still in here. That's what she said. And it's lots of room. No real issues there. But it's just aero tucked in. Looks great. And definitely looks good when you match up the tire with that rim label. Not complaining there, hey guys? Prior to buying the bike, I had heard that some people had some issues with some seat post clamp related creaks, and you know, right out of the gate, knowing that, I just coated both the mechanism on the front here, which is kind of an expansion wedge, with a bunch of that friction paste, as well as all in the seat post, all inside the seat, kind of stay area there, and I never really had an issue. But I can certainly see if you're not, you know, putting some additional friction paste on, or carbon paste on that wedge, much like the SL8 that I had in the past, it suffered from the same thing. So you know what, coat it up and you're not going to have any issues. Otherwise, it may be loud and kind of annoying. But in my case, never really had any issues with it. It's been really silent. The S5 does give you some options when it comes to mounting bottle cages. I obviously went with the NV Aero cages, which I probably wouldn't go with again. I would rather go with the NV, I think they're called CIPs, just a more standard traditional cage made in the US and half the price. I found bottles in these particular NV cages kind of were a bit looser fitting than I would have liked, but I digress. It is nice to have the mounting options if you do in fact want to kind of mount something, you know, bring this guy down and run a single bottle. And conversely, I think Cervelo offers some sort of an Aero water bottle / cage solution on the secondary, you know, if you did want to do that. From a wheel and tires perspective, the reserve wheel set did really good. I think they're called the 5263s, so 63 mil deep in the rear, 52 mil in the front. Very similar to the Rapide CLXs. I definitely like the fact that you get, I believe they're DT internals on the hubs, could be wrong, but I thought they were zip hubs with DT internals. No, they are zip hubs. I'm just looking at that now. That's cool. Zip hubs, so super loud. But the beauty of these rims, in fact, are that they are hooked, or they call it like, I think hybrid hook or semi-hooked, something like that. Weird standard. Being that I'm an over 200-pound rider myself, I definitely like avoiding hookless rims as much as possible. And I know that's becoming a trend, and I've run Zip 404s. I've run a couple other road wheels with hookless, and I just prefer hooked. I just feel safer. The fact that you can run a tube inside these guys, run them tubeless at that 70 PSI, or run a tube and run it at 90. It's just something that I just never really had a problem with. So definitely dig that. No cracks, no issues there. Hubs have been spinning smooth, flawless. I've been running them with TPU tubes. As mentioned, there you go, 52 on their reserve. So I wasn't crazy. And then I think these spokes are Aero as well, which is cool. So that means they're flattened down in the middle to kind of decrease that wind resistance. And then, yeah, just no issues with truing, nothing like that. It's been a solid, super quiet and reliable system throughout the summer. So really no complaints with the reserve wheel set at all. And lo and behold, I was correct. It is the 63 on the back. I don't know how some of this stuff sticks in my head, but yeah, 63 mil deep wheel. So, and I do believe the front and rear are not equal in terms of rim width either. They're kind of optimized around this frame as well. And typically, you know, I've really liked my Roval CLXs just because of the alternating depths as well as widths. But the fact that it is hooked as well was kind of my draw. But when I read about this wheel set being optimized around the S5 frame, I, you know, figured I'd want to test it out for myself. And so far, all things look good. I will give you guys a bit of a sound check on the hub. I know people are always asking for that, so let's spin this up and show you what it sounds like. All right, so let's spin this guy here and see what we can get here. Pretty great sounding hub if you ask me. It doesn't really get better than that because everybody hears you coming. You know, another good thing here that is rarely mentioned on a lot of these bikes nowadays is the fact that this bike actually comes with a ceramic speed bottom bracket. And it's something to worth note because that bottom bracket is, geez, I think a few $100. And, you know, I had spent that on an SL7, and I did get one for the SL8 before I sent that one off. And you know what? Anytime you can smooth out the overall friction in your drivetrain, it really helps your overall efficiency. So the fact that I think across the board in all builds, the S5 does come with that ceramic speed bottom bracket is a really nice feature and certainly worth noting. As well, a lot of people have noted that SRAM Force, or I guess SRAM drivetrains in general, prior to, I believe, this SRAM Force update, had some issues experiencing chain drop. I didn't have any issues with it. And it could be the new group set. I know that the SRAM Force group set on my 2021 Aethos has had a few issues with dropping chain, as well as SRAM Red on my SL7 had some issues dropping the front derailleur. But on this guy, it's been flawless. No issues. Battery charges that last quite a while, no issues. The only thing that I would say is that when you're traveling with the bike, just, you know, either take the batteries off or put it into travel mode, because as soon as you're traveling with it attached like this, remember, those batteries and the systems are motion activated, and that if you go for an 8-hour car ride and then expect to go for a nice long bike ride after, you know, your batteries may have been sitting on for the last, well, entirety of that car ride. So something to note, not a big deal, but something to certainly pay attention to. Some of you may have noticed that I did change out away from the factory rotors on this build. I don't know if it had something to do with the design of the rotors or what, but originally I was experiencing a little bit of rub under heavy side-to-side sprints on this bike. And so I did change to the higher end rotors. They're more aero and have some claims around cooling, etc. But it's a road bike. You don't really experience brake fade that often, unless maybe you're in the mountains. But I did change the rotors, and ever since didn't have any issues with rubbing. But something to keep in mind, because of how aero that fork is and how much leverage you can put into that fork when you are twisting things up, you certainly can get a little bit of brake rub if the brakes aren't ideally set up, which, you know, should be pretty easy to do. Spin the wheel, loosen the bolts, and pull the lever to center them, but sometimes they're not always perfectly set up. Just something to think about. So after all of that, who is this bike for, and who's this bike not for? Well, it's for somebody that has the power or the FTP to get the bike up to speed quicker. You know, if that's your limiting factor, is on the power band where maybe it's a little harder to get things up to speed, you know, this bike isn't going to help that. It definitely rewards raw power to get it up to speed, and then you can kind of take things down, and it holds that speed without a problem. And I know that's a lot of speed talk, so I'll try to change things up. But certainly the reality of things is that the bike certainly lives in that aero department. So if your roads are a lot of ups and downs, but you know, maybe more climbing trails or roads, I probably wouldn't suggest the S5. You know, where it shines is on those wide open, flat roads. And if you can kind of struggle the bike up a hill, then it's not a problem. And that's not saying the bike struggles to climb. Like, it's no different than anything else, other than it's a little bit heavier. And, you know, when we say a little bit, it's a few 100 grams heavier in the frame than, you know, an S-Works. But that's where a lot of the aero tube shaping has to come from. Unfortunately, you can't just create all this profile and all these swooping diameters and you know, real technical engineering without having some physical tubing to the bike. So unfortunately, yes, it is a little bit heavier, but with that, the bike cuts through the wind. And it just, you know, once you're at speed, it's not a problem. The other thing is, you know what, because the bike is a little bit heavier, it tends to hold speed even going down hills a little bit faster, right? Because that, in conjunction with the higher speed efficiency and a little bit of weight, you know what, I do notice it is a little bit quicker overall going downhill. But the main thing is, and the main thing to take away from this, is that because it's an aero bike, it lives at that speed. It wants to be going fast. The stiffness level of the bottom bracket of that rear end, of the seat post and the seat stay, it's only truly comfortable when you are going fast. So a lot of the reviews I read online basically said, oh, the bike is so stiff and uncomfortable. And I go, well, I can understand how a reviewer would kind of point that out. If you're not at speed pushing the bike on its limit, then yeah, it's going to feel a little stiff, which is fine if you're going fast, right? The other thing to think about is, because the bike is so planted, it's on rails, and you are pushing it hard to get it up to speed, is you end up with, you know, these PRs and segments that you go, I don't feel like I really tried super hard to get it. And then you look at the power numbers and go, oh no, they're there, but I didn't feel like I should have earned that PR or KOM. Just because you are literally cutting through the wind and flying through segments, but you're not really putting in any more work than you normally would. It's a really strange feeling. So, you know, we've talked about how this guy really rewards flat out, I guess, on flat ground and higher speeds. But who's this bike not for? Well, I would say it's not for, obviously, a climber. It's certainly not an all-arounder like a Tarmac would be, where it's kind of light, it's kind of aero, but it's neither. So it's not a climbing bike, and it's not an all-arounder. It rewards the higher end of the spectrum of speed, and that's kind of what it is. Another thing that I kind of didn't really touch on much, you know, things that I'd change on it. Well, I don't like the proprietary bar and stem. I think that that's certainly something that, you know, it's great, it's efficient, and I at least like that it's kind of two pieces and that you can change either the bar width or the stem length independently. But you know what? I really wish I could run my NV Aero bar on there. And I know previous generations of the S5 had an adapter you could put on the top of this fork, and it would convert it to a standard stem mount, or you could put like a standard stem on it. This, for some reason, doesn't have that. So if I could change that stem and bar, or at least make that overall design something where, you know, it is standard, that would be something that on future generations I obviously would appreciate. But since this bike is an all-out racer and they're going for every watt of slipperiness in the wind tunnel, I guess the Super V stem and aero bar are certainly nothing to shake a stick at the end of the day. I guess the only other thing that we're kind of missing here is talking about how aggressive the bike is. And as you can kind of see, you know, the front end is quite low. So it's an aggressive bike, and I would even argue it's at the sharper end of the spectrum of aggressive levels on race bikes. So, you know, I've taken it out personally on 5 and 6 hour rides, and it's at that point where your neck, because you are leaning over pretty hard, your neck does get sore because of the aggressive position you're in. But as a result, you're also, you know, slipping through sections of road where you go, huh, I just took 2 minutes off a segment that was 25, 30 minutes long and didn't do any more power. Like, it's just very, very strange that way because the bike is just so aerodynamic. And I'm probably exaggerating with those numbers, but let's be honest, it is what it is. It's an aggressive bike. You know, I love the tube shapes. I love the profile of the bike. It looks and oozes that it's an expensive bike just because of the tube shapes, I would say, and how much that rear wheel's tucked in. You know, the fact that it has an aero stem and an aero bar that are proprietary are things that I just kind of gave up on early on because I go, you know, the guys winning on this bike are world-class athletes at the top of the sport, so there has to be something to it, and if it works for them, obviously it works for me. However, if you're the guy that wants that all-arounder, that's, you know, a nice and relaxed front end with, you know, you can use any bar and stem that you want and, you know, possibly any saddle you want. You know what, like, at the end of the day, it's not that bike. It's certainly an all-out race bike. It's super aggressive, and you've got to be going real, real fast to reap the rewards of it. If you're not doing that, the bike's not for you. Now, if you are doing those things, then this bike is for you, because I have gotten so many PRs this year aboard this bike that I didn't even think were possible. You know, we're talking about sections of road where, you know, I've had a fairly decent level of fitness, consistent level of fitness for the last 3 years. And I've gone from the Aethos to the Tarmac SL7 to the Tarmac SL8 and variations of S-Works of each. And you do those segments on long, flat sections of road, and you put in the same power numbers, and somehow, some way, you're much quicker. And you go, those bikes aren't slouches. But for some reason, you're just absolutely destroying your own times with the same level of power. So obviously there's something to it. I guess the way to look at that is the bike, you could almost argue it's kind of boring because you don't feel like you're ever really on the edge. And I would compare that to if you've ever driven a sports car versus like a Toyota Camry, where if you're pushing that Toyota Camry on an off-ramp and really leaning the thing and you're feeling the flex and and how much body roll that the car gives you, you feel like you're flying. But if you do that with a race car or like an S5, an Audi or something, or a BMW M3, and you're taking that same corner, it doesn't feel like you're pushing it. That's what this bike is. It just doesn't feel like it, it can just take it for days and days, and it doesn't complain. It turns like it's on rails. It cuts through the air like no problem, and has so much instant power transfer from that bottom bracket up through those shaped tubes, up through that aero seat post, into those aero bars. It just wants to get up and go, and it wants to be at speed, and it is more than capable of handling that speed, because that's what that bike is made for, and that's who this bike is 100% for. All right, well, hopefully that helped answer some questions for some prospective buyers. As you guys know, I am not affiliated with Cervelo. I bought this with my own money, and it is the bike that currently I want to ride. So, of any bike on the market, this is the one I chose. So, really excited to share my opinions with you. What do you guys think? Am I hitting the nail on the head, or am I out in left field? I obviously sure hope I'm not in left field, but at the end of the day, could be. That's just my opinion. And, I've done these types of videos on the Aethos. I've done it on the SL7, both comp as well as an S-Works. And I've done this on an SL8 S-Works as well. It's just kind of how I ride my bikes, and kind of things that I look for, and the subtleties that I notice in the, 20 plus years of riding bikes now. I tend to pick up on very miniature and very little things that probably don't matter to a lot of people, but it's just something I notice. So that's the S5 after a couple thousand miles on it this past summer, and figured it was worth doing a video on. Like I said, at some point I'll do a video comparing this directly with a Tarmac SL8, which probably be another popular video based on kind of the bike and the market and the people looking for both. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for stopping by and spending some time with me and going over the bike. If you have any questions, leave them below, and if I missed anything, please let me know. Otherwise, like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff, and until next time, we'll see you later. All right, peace.